Hello, and welcome to another edition of another webinar on how to make better strategy with the Better Strategy OS, a proven system to design and activate clear, winning, actionable strategies. And today we're actually going to discuss how to put innovation back into strategy. Now, for those of you who don't know me yet, maybe my name is Mark Snukas. For the past 20 plus years, I've helped CEOs, business owners, and leadership teams to design and execute winning strategies. And I do that by equipping them with proven systems, which are both rigorous and practical, so that they can actually really have a better strategy. Most of my working life, I've been a consultant. I also was a former director of innovation at Deloitte, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And besides my consulting, I also do executive education. So let's have a look at why innovation, why do we need to put innovation back into strategy? Now, if you look at various surveys on strategy, it doesn't really matter which one, they all kind of come to the same conclusion that strategy, how we do it these days, is not working anymore. And here are three results that are particularly interesting to the topic that we will be discussing today. So here is a study that says like 70% of leaders and executives think that their strategy is not clear enough about how it's going to create value for customers. That's a topic we're going to discuss today, about how you can use innovation to make sure that you have a strategy that is actually creating value for customers. 73% think that the strategy is not meaningfully differentiated. So again, if you are not differentiated, this is all about putting innovation into strategy. Well, at the end of the day, you differentiate by being innovative, by doing things differently or doing different things altogether. And then the final result here is 68% are concerned that the strategy is not bold enough. So again, talking about strategy, talking about innovation, how bold is it? And it's going to be bolder if you are more innovative. So I like to say, I published an article on LinkedIn the other day where I talked about strategy is really innovation in disguise. And so we call it strategy, we talk about strategy, but to really make a good strategy, it needs to have a creative element, it needs to have some innovation in it. I'm going to put the comments in the link to the article in the comments after the webinar. So question is how to put innovation back into strategy. And this is actually a question that I was really fascinated with. I wanted to learn about how companies, and in particular established companies, actually create new innovations and strategic innovations. So I actually get a doctorate in this particular topic, researching that. And one of the companies I came across when doing my research was ProSiebenSat.1. So ProSiebenSat.1 is a German TV company. And what you need to know about the strategy and the business model is that it's free TV. So you can watch it for free. And the money obviously comes in through the advertisement space that they sell. Now, in 2012, they had a new CEO and they set themselves a quite ambitious target, I would say, to grow by €1 billion top line revenues over the course of the next 6 years. So all in all, so if you look at it year on year, it's only like 10%, but overall it's like 42%. So $1 billion is quite an interesting number. And the question is obviously, where are we going to find 1 billion in additional revenues? And if you've been following me, you know that I talk about strategy as the answer to the challenges that you're facing on the way to achieve your ambitions. Now, here we have the ambitions, so the plus 1 billion, and ProSieben also faced lots of challenges when it came to how to find that kind of money. Now, first of all, if you want to grow your company by $1 billion, or you want to grow your revenues, one thing that you could do is you can raise your prices. But in the case of ProSieben, so the challenge is that they have usually large customers. You have the Coca-Colas, the Procters and Gambles, who buy TV advertising. They tend to buy a lot of advertising, and because they buy so much volume, they have a lot of negotiating power. So it's really difficult to raise your prices. Now, if you can't raise your prices you try to sell more. And again, here as ProSiebenSat.1, so it's a German company, as I said, so it's part of the EU. We are in Europe, and as many of you probably know, Europe likes its regulations. So in Europe, by law, it is law defines how many advertising minutes you are allowed to broadcast on average per hour throughout the day. So there is kind of like a legal limit on how much of your product you can actually sell on the market. So you cannot raise your prices, you can't sell more. So organic growth is difficult. I don't want to say no organic growth possible, but it's quite difficult. So inorganic growth, it's usually M&A. So you buy more volume, if you like, you buy revenue as well. ProSiebenSat.1 is already the combination of ProSieben and Sat.1 on the other hand. So they have already a pretty dominating position in the market. So M&A is also something really difficult. So we cannot sell more, we cannot raise our prices, and we cannot buy additional revenues through mergers and acquisitions. So how are we going to grow our business? So how do we find opportunities for new growth and at the same time also for innovation? Now, some of you might be familiar with this idea of the innovation ambition matrix, where you can say, well, if we want to innovate, we have different possibilities that we can do here. So we can innovate on the where to compete kind of side. So going from serving existing markets and existing customers in our core, we can move into adjacencies, so enter adjacent markets, serve adjacent customers, or we can go for transformational innovation, which is then really about creating new markets or also targeting completely new customer needs. So not necessarily new customers, but new customer needs. And then on the other hand, you can also think about how you compete. So do you use your existing offering and assets, or do you add or innovate a little bit your offering and assets, or do you actually develop and design and innovate completely new offerings, new assets, and even new business models? So if you want to put innovation back into your strategy, this matrix gives you a little bit of an orientation for where you could go and where you could search, let's say, for opportunities for innovation. Now, let's dive a little bit into this. Obviously, I mean, it's easy to say to enter adjacent markets or create completely new markets, but the question still remains, how are you going to do that? Right? So where do you find these adjacencies? Which adjacencies should you go into? How can you focus on new customer needs and so on and so forth? Now, in particular, when we're talking about strategy, growth is very often a key challenge, like in this example. So finding new growth is the easiest way to find new growth is to go after customers that are underserved or neglected. So if you want to innovate in the sense of going into these adjacencies and transformational space of innovation here, it doesn't really serve you well to focus on your existing customers or to focus on your happiest customers, because in all likelihood they buy already whatever they can. So instead of that, you should focus on underserved or neglected customers. And to illustrate that with our case study here, our example of ProSieben. So who is typically a non-customer, if you like to call it that, for TV advertising? Well, it's startups and small and medium-sized businesses. So usually it's only big corporates who buy TV advertising, but startups and small and medium-sized businesses were completely, up to ProSieben came up with this new strategy at least, were completely ignored. So the whole industry never thought of, or they might have thought of, but they said, well, it's not worth going there. We can't make any money with startups and small and medium businesses. And here are typically the challenges and the barriers of why startups and small and medium customers are not a good customer group for TV advertising. So first of all, I mean, they cannot afford it. So that's the common reason that people have, and that is usually given. But ProSieben dug a little bit deeper, and they discovered that, well, there are some companies who indeed cannot afford it, but there are also companies in that small, medium-sized startup kind of space who can afford it, and they would like to do it, but they are a little risk averse. They don't want to spend their money on something with an uncertain outcome. And then there were those who said, well, we have the money and we are okay with the risk, but we have never done it, so we don't know how this works. Right? So this is the three main barriers or challenges that ProSieben faced here. So they had a customer group that was interested, but they had some reasons why they wouldn't do business with ProSieben or TV advertising in general. So some was financial, cannot afford it. Some was more a risk challenge or risk averse barrier. I don't want to spend money on an uncertain outcome. And the third challenge is more of an expertise, a capability challenge, if you like. So we have the money and we want to do it, but we don't know how it works. So this is really your opportunity here. So you can move into that adjacency of startups and small and medium companies if you come up with a strategy to solve these particular challenges here. So which is about the question of how are you actually going to seize these opportunities? Which brings us to the second axis here, the how to compete. This is all about, so what are the products, the services, the offering, the assets we need? What is the business model we need so that we can make good business with these startups and small and medium-sized companies in this particular case? And how to compete, a different way to think about it. So yes, there is the offering. So you need to think about what are we going to offer, and I'm going to go a little bit more into the details. But you also might need to think about your operating model. So how your company actually works, how your company operates to produce that offering. And very often when we're talking about innovation here, it's also worth talking about the revenue model. So how to win as a company means also how are we going to generate money as a company, which is all about that revenue model. Now, quickly, so if we're going into the details now, designing your offering means that you can think about the product, you can think about the service you provide, and you can think about the entire customer experience. If we think about the operating model, so it's really a question of what are the activities that we need to do, what are the capabilities we need, what do we need to be good at, really, what are the resources we need in order to be able to do that. And sometimes, talking about actors and partners, we don't need to do everything ourselves, but we can partner up with other companies in our ecosystem who then provide some of these resources or who actually do some of these activities. And sometimes innovation also happens if you just change the sequence of these activities. Now, when it comes to the revenue model, it's thinking about, so what are the revenue streams? Where does the money come from? What do customers actually pay for? You need to think about a pricing strategy. So how do you actually set the price? And you also, more in the B2C world, I would say, you need to think about payment mechanisms, or how are you going to allow your customers to pay. And just as a little side example, let's say here is one of my favorite examples of a innovative revenue model. This is a coffee shop called Anti-Café. They launched in Paris. They are more broadly now in the entire France. And what is interesting about Anti-Café is that, so it's like a Starbucks, we could say, but at Anti-Café you get your coffee for free. So just think about it for a moment. There's a coffee shop here, Starbucks, giving away coffee for free. So the question obviously is, how are they making money? Where does the money come from? And Anti-Café thought about it this way. They said, we don't charge you for the coffee you consume, but we charge you for the time you spend in our coffee shop. And I think it's a brilliant idea. So if you think about customer needs, why do customers very often go to a coffee shop? Well, very often it's not because of the coffee, but it is because they need a place to work. They want to use the Wi-Fi. They want to meet with friends. Maybe they want to have a business meeting. So it's more about the time you spend there, and it's not so much about the coffee you consume. Just a little example for putting innovation into a strategy here in the form of a revenue model. What did ProSieben do? So remember, startups, small and medium companies, they are an interesting target group. So it's an adjacency or even a transformational where to compete that we want to enter. And the question is how to do that. How can we remove the challenges, the barriers that these customers face, while still being profitable, of course. And ProSieben came up with this idea. So they said, well, how are we going to compete here? We're not going to charge fixed prices. In fact, we're going to give away media for free, if you like. We're going to take care of the production. So we take away all these barriers that we mentioned earlier, and we only get paid if we create revenues for your business. So the idea was simply media for revenue. So no risk, no upfront payment, and ProSieben actually takes care of the whole production. So really no reason to say I'm not interested in this anymore. So this was the core idea of the strategy. So obviously, if you think about strategy, many of you might think about long-term objectives. Well, we have the billion, detailed plans, and so on. But here it's a good example of a clear strategy. I think it's a very clear core idea of what you want to do. You have a customer group you want to address, also very clear who's our customer, and you have a very clear what are we going to offer and how are we going to compete, how are we going to create value for our customers and also for us, hopefully, because at this stage it's just an idea, it's just a hypothesis we have. We don't know yet whether this will actually work or not. So, which brings me to the question of how can you test your new strategy, right? This is something that I've been talking about quite a bit, and it's also something that we see a lot happening right now. So instead of doing that traditional strategic planning, we rather want to test not only products, some of you might know it from MVP, so minimal viable products, and experimenting with innovations, but the same logic actually applies on a strategy, on a strategic level. So how are you going to test an idea like this? What ProSieben did was really easy. They just issued a press release. So on a half a page press release, it doesn't cost any money. There is no effort whatsoever. You don't need big resources. You don't need a lot of money. It's quite easy. They issued just a press release to test whether there is interest in the market in this new strategy, in this new offering. They have had dozens of businesses that actually responded, that got back to them and said, yeah, this is great, we want to do it. And then they sat down and they just picked 5 companies where they said, okay, here are 5 we're going to start doing this with. We're going to actually then test whether the idea is feasible. We tested here that we want, or that customers want it. So if you think about you use design thinking tests, what you want to test is always desirability first. So interest is there. Now we need to test feasibility, and we actually need to test whether we can make money with this, which, by the way, was the only KPI that they had from the team here, had from the CEO, and was show me that we can make money with this. So they had these 5 companies, and they started experimenting with the model, implementing the model for these 5 companies. And they learned a couple of things. So these are a couple of iterations that they went through to refine the strategy, if you like. So, as I said, they started with media for revenue share, and they didn't really have a specific company focus. So in these, the first 5 that they picked, there was an organic lemonade producer, there was some skin care, there was also some online businesses. So it was really a broad mix, and it was based on gut feeling, really, whether they thought this could fit with their target audience, that could fit with their programs or not. So they had these first 5, and they started working with them. And they learned a couple of things. So they learned, for example, that when working with startups, to make them really committed to the whole process, it would be good to introduce a fixed fee. So they had some challenges with some of the companies they picked. They wouldn't give ProSieben the information ProSieben needed to be able to produce the TV advertising spot. So they said, well, let's introduce just a small startup fee, if you like. In this way, we're going to cover some cost, we're going to share some initial risk, and we're going to make sure that the company is actually committed in working with us. They continued to media for revenue, so that worked well. Also, in fact, they were already profitable after the first 6 months. Also, they proved that they can make money with this. And they also learned that it works better, though, with online businesses than with offline businesses. So they focused more on the online businesses. So, for example, I mentioned the organic lemonade producer. So the challenge they had was, if you sell more lemonade, was it really because people saw the TV advertisement, or was it maybe because it was a sunny day and people just bought more lemonade because they were more thirsty? So kind of difficult to show the relationship between the advertisement and the sales actually going up. Another challenge they had with these offline businesses was they had an inventory risk. So again, the lemonade producer, for example, ProSieben might create a lot of demand, but then there is no supply. So they said, we're going to go away from the anything with an inventory risk. And they said, we're going to focus on online businesses because here they could actually see that once the advertisement was aired, for 2-3 days, the sales on the website would go up and then would kind of level off again. New advertisement again, 2-3 days of good sales, and then sales were leveling off again. So they had some proof that the advertisement actually led to an increase in sales so that they could calculate the revenues created and calculate actually their share. So they kept on doing this. And then in the next iteration, they learned that, especially when working with startups, media for equity would have been even nicer than media for revenue. For two reasons. First of all, they could have made more money with the media for equity than the media for revenue. And when working with startups, they also learned that the other startup partners and equity investors, they were not really happy with the ProSieben model because, yes, they would generate sales, they would bring money in, but ProSieben would always take cash as its share out of the business. And the other equity partners, so they put the money in and then ProSieben would take it out again. So they were not too happy with that. And so they said, well, if we invest with our media for equity, so you invest with money, we invest with our media power, then our interest, our common interest is to increase the value of the equity, so we're all in the same boat. And this model was more accepted by the other equity partners. And we're going to come to that again when we talk about value creation for different stakeholders. So they kept on doing that. And then eventually they became so good at spotting the businesses where this actually works really well. So they created a portfolio of strategic investments, as they called it. And actually nowadays they have separate companies for these different portfolios. So they have online shopping, for example, or lifestyle, I think they call it. So they have shopping in it. They have fitness programs in it. They have a dating portal as part of that. They have travel, so everything that has to do with booking vacations, booking flights, rental cars, hotels, weather channels, all of that. So they have discovered really where they are really good with this model, and they focus on these industries in these portfolios of strategic investments. And by the way, so this whole process here took about 2 years. So it was 2 years of fine-tuning and tweaking to really make it work. They made profit, as I said, already after 6 months, but to really fine-tune the whole thing, it took about 2 years. And only after 2 years did they decide, well, let's found a company who does only this. And this company was called Seven Ventures. In the meantime, so they have Seven Travel, they have Seven Commerce, and so on and so forth. So a company for all these portfolios, as I said. And for example, something that also kind of they discovered, so sometimes we talk about emerging strategy, also they discovered that they could be really good in online travel. So at some point they said, well, we want to be the leader in online travel. So this was not really an ambition they had when they started, but it was something they learned along the way that they could be really good here. And so the billion-dollar question is, did it work? And if you remember, so they started with 2.3 in 2012, and the objective was to go to 2.4 in 2018. So they almost hit their target a couple of years earlier, even in 2015. And over the course of the 6 years, so they actually were able to not increase by 1 billion, but to increase revenues by 1.6 billion, so to achieve 4 billion. Now, what you also probably notice here, if we're talking about putting innovation into strategy, we cannot rely on that traditional strategy process. So we also need to reinvent and innovate how we do strategy, if you like. So the traditional process of strategy usually looks something like this. So we have to do the analysis of the markets, of trends, of competitors, and so on and so forth. Then we develop the strategy, then we plan the execution, then we go about and execute, and then we need to monitor the progress, and then sometimes we show this, maybe it goes back into the new cycle of development. But a fairly linear process where first we think, so the analysis, the development, the planning, so that's all the thinking comes first, and then comes the doing. And I think it's quite easy to see, it's obvious that, this first think, then do is also built on this belief of scientific management, of the separation actually of thinking. Thinking is done by consultants or in the boardroom, and then execution has to be done by the rest of the organization. But what we see here in this example, and I have many examples like this, is that in real life, strategy or crafting your strategy, be it an innovative strategy or also just a more regular non-innovative strategy, if you like, is always about an iteration of, you make sense of what is happening around you, what is going on. You make decisions based on what you believe to be happening and believe to be the good or the best next strategic move. And then you take action. This action is going to produce results, which again are going to feed your next cycle of making sense, making decisions. Just like with ProSieben, so they had a broad idea for what the strategy could be. Nobody had ever done something like this before, so it's really difficult to figure out what are the details, and you don't know what you don't know, so you need to act, and by action you create actually data that you can use then to go into the next cycles. So, and over time, as you go through these cycles, so in the case of ProSieben, it was 2 years, obviously your strategy becomes better and better, you raise the maturity of your strategy, and you become more and more successful. Now, the question is, when is it actually a good strategy? When can you kind of stop going through these cycles and maybe shift to a mode that is a little bit more about scaling instead of fine-tuning and iterating on your strategy? Well, this is the moment you create value. And you need to create value for 3 different parties. First of all, obviously, your strategy needs to create value for you as a company. Now, this can be financial, but it can also be more strategic in the sense that it gives you future options, future opportunities that you can go into. Customer value, so obviously your strategy needs to create value for the customers, which usually means in some kind of way it fulfills the customer's needs or it makes their life a little easier. And interesting also, like we saw with ProSieben, you need to think about your ecosystem partners and the value you create for those partners. So in the case of ProSieben, that was creating value for the other equity investors when it came to the startups. And only when they were able to do this, then the idea actually really took off. So here you have again the summary of the value created by ProSieben. So obviously for them, it was a new revenue stream. They became a little bit more independent from the core customers by building these new customers. They had a portfolio of strategic investments. They actually could use the insights from how well advertising works also in the traditional business for the customers. So the startups and the small and medium companies, where this was access to media, risk-free, low upfront cash out, and they didn't have to deal with it. They got the additional revenues. And as I mentioned, the other investors, they profit from the increase in the company value. Now, this is a summary. So this is what we call the art of opportunity. And it's the name of a book that I wrote together with colleagues on this particular way to do strategy. And here we illustrate that we shift the perspective a little bit when we talk about strategy, what we actually talk about. So we don't talk too much about industry, products, and markets, but we really focus more on customers, non-customers, their needs, job to be done, the customer experience, then how to play. We try to innovate the offering, the business model, the operating model, the revenue model, and you win once you create value for all these companies involved. Now, just looking at the chat, if you have questions, just put them into the comments. We're going to have some time to answer them in a minute. Now, this was a high-level introduction, I would say, to this idea of putting innovation back into strategy with the art of opportunity. If you want to learn more about this, there is an online course you can join. It's called The Art of Opportunity. So in the course, we take you step by step through this process, and for each step there is examples, there is case studies, there is tools that you can use, there is an online toolbox, there is workshop slides, there is slides to train your team, and so on and so forth. So really a complete package. So if you're interested in learning more, then head over to snickers.com/AOO and have a look at the Art of Opportunity. If you want to learn more about the Better Strategy OS, I have a live masterclass coming up next week. So this is 4 hours live. The Art of Opportunity course is recorded, but this one is live, where we talk about a clear definition of strategy. We talk about the content of strategy. So also some of the things that I just mentioned. What do you think about if you think about strategy? And we also go deeper into this iterative process for doing strategy. So if you're interested in learning more about this, then happy to see you there next week. Good. And on to some questions. So let me look at the chat, whether you have any. If you don't have any yet, then please put them in, so you can add them in the comments. If you don't have any right now, then you can also put them later. I'm gonna come back to the chat and have a look at that. So let me just give you a moment here to think about any questions you might have. No, it seems like I'm not getting any questions. Good. So I assume everything was clear. So thank you very much for your attention and for being with us here for this sweet short half an hour. I hope the session was valuable. If we are not yet connected on LinkedIn, then please reach out, follow me, send me a connection request, and see you next time. Until then, thanks for your attention, and let's put innovation back into strategy. Thank you.